So I can't imagine a better environment than this one for us to be able to settle comfortably into ourselves. And that works very conveniently and usefully towards the practice. The practice we're involved in is to have self-revelation, to see what is there, not to dwell upon what is there. And this takes us to a crucial question that each one of us should ask along the way, and perhaps many times in the course of our practice history. What do I really want from this practice? Now, don't answer that question superficially, as if it's already known. You have to bring up the resolution and honesty that that question is pointing towards. What do I really want from this practice? Sometimes you'll find that what you want changes over time. But answering that question is secondary to the honesty that we have to approach that question with. The honesty is the true compass of our meditation, of our spiritual journey. And the way we address that question, I want what the Buddha was pointing towards, or I want the freedom the Buddha was pointing to. That may be the answer to your question, but likely it is not. Perhaps a more honest answer would be, I really want to be soothed. I want to step out of the cacophony of noise that fills me. I want some respite from my life. I don't know where that question will take you, but it needs to be understood and directed from the vantage point of honesty and sincerity. Because the way we answer that question and the honesty with which we impart to that question will determine the practices and techniques we use in the resolution of that question. And those practices and techniques can be in line with the Dharma or aligned with our self-needs. If they are aligned with our self-needs, those methods are a-dharmic. Now, it may be that that's what you want to do. And there's nothing actually wrong with that. We just have to be honest with our motivation. Perhaps what we want to do really is self-improve, to establish certain qualities in ourselves, certain tendencies, certain paramis, we might say, to be more loving, to be kinder, to be more gentle, to add to the sense of me with nourishing qualities of heart, which is fine. And perhaps all practices at some point take that deviation, but it is a deviation. The practice of the Dharma takes us to emptiness. There is only one direction it flows. And the practices we use towards that resolution of stepping out of our self-deception have to be inclusive. Now, why do I say that? I say that because the paradigm, the perceptual field in which we live, when we are self-focused, self-centered in our focus, in our perception, is within the field of separation, of distance to things, of things myself here and things outside of me. And the resolution of the Dharma is to break down the boundaries that create that perception. And the only way to break down the boundaries that create the perceptual field of separation is by being inclusive in virtually everything we do. Now, if we use techniques that build boundaries, self-protective fields, and greater walls around us, we can see that that is not going to take us in line with the truth of the way the Dharma flows. And we have to be very careful in the way we select the techniques and methods we use, because we may have an intention to move in the direction of inclusivity, but use techniques that make us more exclusive, tighter, and more bound to our own program of thought, meaning, and purpose. So each one of us, within that sphere, within that aim, that tone of honesty, have to ask ourselves very important questions regarding the forms and techniques we use. Is what I'm doing creating boundaries or leading to inclusivity? Is what I'm doing leading to greater understanding? Because we can only break down the boundaries and become more inclusive when we understand the nature of the boundaries we have self-imposed. And all boundaries are self-imposed. So if we're living comfortably within self-imposed boundaries, never testing the edges of that perimeter, then we will remain inclusive only as far as the gates and fence posts allow us to be. So eventually our practices have to move so that they include the very boundaries we stay protected within. We cannot spiritually bypass any issue. And this is an important point, because sometimes there are emotional areas of ourselves that we would like to avoid. And we find practices that allow us to avoid those areas. Practices that don't let us settle within the emotion, so that we can understand the boundary that emotion has imposed upon us. We stay locked and chained and fenced within our fear of what that emotion says about us, unwilling to test that boundary, to see it anew, afresh, from a different perspective, one that's inclusive and not exclusive of it. If we stay for a long period of time avoiding that emotion or the emotional imprint of early childhood assumptions, that will not go away. And I have seen teachers of this tradition fall victim to their emotional bypassing decades later. This is a practice of inclusivity, of seeing everything, understanding everything, and releasing everything to be what it really is, in essence, in truth, not what our mind has conjured it up to be, not what our mind believes it to be, not what our mind fears it is. So saying, there are some emotional issues in us, in some of us, in a few of us, that are early childhood abuse issues that need to be explored within the accompaniment of professional therapists, usually, so that we can access that trauma from a sense of stability. And so, not to take this on as a challenge, to see everything, regardless of how dark and terrifying it might be, but to have a sensibility in oneself of what I can handle and what I cannot. And use the appropriate methods of being able to handle what we are not able to handle alone, but not forgetting that it's there. Just seeking the right environment for that exploration. But for most of us, our psyche is not filled with that trauma. But we still spiritually bypass emotional issues. My suggestion is to look at what often motivates our action, because we can often see those bypassed emotional assumptions within the motivation of how we act, of the methods we select. Unconsciously, we often select methods that bypass the understanding of those issues. Such a case could be, not always, one in which I will just notice an emotion and come back to my breath. And that way I don't have to deal with the undertoning of the message that emotion imparts. Now, that may be a good method for some people for a certain period of time, but it can also be used very skillfully as a bypassed issue and method itself. And I leave it to you as to how you are using it. Again, it's coming back to the honesty of how we are using the methods we are using, and whether they are leading to a more inclusive, less bound, and freer space within us.